All right, so when we discussed adolescence, we talked about how some of the primary health concerns that you have during that time are due to risky behaviors. Some of that continues to be true throughout early adulthood. The textbook talks quite a bit about like alcohol and substance abuse. I took that out just for time's sake, but I recommend you read that portion of the textbook. However, I did want to talk a little bit about sexual behaviors during early adulthood. Overall attitudes about sexual behaviors have shifted pretty dramatically over the past few decades. Now nearly all have had intercourse by age 25, so it's pretty common for people to have become sexually active, whether they're married or not, by this early adulthood period. And people's attitudes, like I said, have changed pretty drastically. So in regards to the morality of premarital sex, basically. So this is the percentage of U.S. adults agreeing that premarital sex or extramarital sex, in yellow, is not wrong at all. And the number of those saying that premarital sex, at least, is not wrong has gone up quite a bit. From 1970 to this last year here is 2012. The number of people saying extramarital sex, however, has not gone up. So that kind of shows you it's not necessarily attitudes about sex overall. It's more just this idea that engaging in sex when you're not married is okay. Most sexual encounters during early adulthood, though, do occur in the context of emotional commitment in a sort of committed relationship. People in early adulthood tend to seek out partners who are similar to them in a number of ways. Most people still meet through kind of traditional means, meeting through friends and family members, but obviously meeting online is becoming an increasingly popular way to meet someone or start a relationship. There's also been a trend towards more sexual partners within a lifetime, but again, most of those are happening in the context of a committed relationship. Partners who are in committed relationships tend to have sex more often and are more satisfied compared to earlier years. And during this early adulthood phase in the college years, there's kind of a rise in non-committal sexual activity, so like hookups and friends with benefits, things like that. However, I would say that a lot of media has drastically exaggerated this. So a lot of media outlets try to make it sound like there's this hookup culture crisis and it's something that's explosive and crazier than it used to be. It has been shown that there's a slight increase in hookups, but it's probably not to the extreme that a lot of media outlets make it sound. There also have been changes in attitudes towards sexual minorities. So public acceptance of same-sex marriage, for example, has grown quite a bit. This graph is showing the percentage of U.S. adults who support same-sex marriage. They have it broken down by generation and then across this 10-year gap. So the blue line are baby boomers. So that would be people born between 1946 and 1964. If Generation X is 1965 to 1980, according to this graph, and then millennials is anyone born after 1980. This is the percentage saying yes, they support it in 2005, 2010, and 2015. So in 2015, at least for millennials, over 70% supported same-sex marriage, compared to the lowest number we could look at here is 2005 for baby boomers was at 35%. It's estimated that about 3.8% of the U.S. population identifies as a sexual minority, either lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Their sexual behaviors tend to be similar to that of heterosexuals, so the stuff I talked about on the previous slide as far as the number of partners they have and whether they're in a committed relationship, etc. One of the differences, though, sexual minorities tend to live in larger cities, in college towns, and tend to be more well-educated compared to their heterosexual peers. Sexually transmitted diseases and infections continues to be a health issue during this early adulthood period. In the U.S., about 25% will contract an STI sometime during their lifetime. They're more common during that adolescent phase, so 15 to 24 is the most common period to contract an STI, but it still continues to be common throughout early adulthood as well. Among all the STDs and STIs, AIDS and HIV is the most serious. And the U.S. has the highest incidence among industrialized nations of HIV-positive adults. That's partly due to having multiple sexual partners, but also due to using intravenous drugs and sharing needles, which is another way to contract AIDS and HIV. In addition to STIs, another health concern during this time is sexual coercion and rape. Becomes more common during early adulthood than it is at any other time, particularly on college campuses. Very, very common. It's estimated that about 19% of US women will be victims of rape at some point in their lifetime, and again, that's more common during early adulthood than any other period. A lot of people, unfortunately, tend to focus on the personal characteristics of the victim, but it's been shown that really the characteristics of the victim have no predictive power as far as whether someone's going to be sexually assaulted or not. Really, the personal characteristics of the perpetrator tend to be more predictive if a sexual assault will occur. And the next slide has some of those characteristics, so I'll talk about that in just a minute. Most perpetrators of sexual assault are male, but it is, there are some cases where women are also perpetrators of sexual coercion.